We all have a story to tell. Let's tell yours. Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast with your host, Jason. Come together and listen to journey stories and more from interesting people. Welcome your host, Jason.
I often post on various audio forums, and I want to take this time to just thank them. In no particular order, they are audiosciencereview.com, audioroundtable.com, audiocircle.com, audioshark.org, audiofilestyle.com, avnirvana.com, diyaudio.com, gearspace.com, and the Parts Express forum. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your viewership and enjoy. Today on the Intellectual People Podcast, I have Bruno from Purify Audio and keyaudio.com. How are you doing today, Bruno?
Not too shabby, and yourself?
I'm doing very well. It's quite early here in East Coast. Who is Bruno?
Who am I? I'm actually minded of a situation that I had with one of my daughters a while ago, adoptive daughters, and one of them was going through identity crisis. I mean, the two of them took turns, and at some point I spotted that they were trying to work out who they were, and I said, you know what, that's the person who's standing in your shoes. That's all there is to be said about that. Of course, I can imagine that this isn't very helpful for your for your listeners. So I'm probably best known as an electrical engineer working on audio systems, both on the amplifier and loudspeaker end.
How did you get there? Let's go back into your childhood. Did you always dream of being an electrical engineer?
Not really. I mean, apart from a few short interludes, it was pretty clear that I was going to go into some kind of engineering. But initially, let's say, I mean, I was born in '73, so in the early '80s, that puts me in that generation of young people who got into computing with small 8-bit computers, and I sat there doing programming all the time. And for most of my youth, I kind of imagined that that I would be a computer programmer. That really only changed when somewhere around the age of 16 or 17, I was doing this massive project. I was actually enormously overreached myself. I was trying to do a 3D CAD program, which I mean, which one is want to do when one is 16 in the early 90s. And then I suddenly realized, hang on, I don't want to be sitting behind a screen for the rest of my life. And it's only then that I sort of actively started taking part in my dad's hobby, which was audio.
Ah, so your dad was an audiophile? Did he consider himself an audiophile?
That particular word actually entered our vocabulary quite late. I first ran into it sort of in the late 90s, and at that point, I thought audiophile simply meant someone who was really into the absurd end of high-end audio, and as a result, sort of, I mean, we were just audio hobbyists. Let's put it that way.
Understood. So you took a liking to it, to the of it, and obviously the music.
Yeah, absolutely, and initially it was mostly about the technology, not so much the music. I mean, I really can't vouch for my younger self's musical tastes. I mean, every time I move house and I see my old record and CD collection, it's a bit embarrassing. I think probably the most formative experience that I had was that a friend of my dad's came around, and he had this glitzy amplifier with him, and would you listen to this thing, and so on. And that was just around the time that my father, out of sheer contrariness, had bought a second-hand valve amplifier with EL84s in them I think 6BQ7 as they are known over on your end of the water. So little 12-watt affair, and that thing was built somewhere in the 50s or 60s, and my father had just refurbished it a bit. That means we have two amplifiers that we want to listen to. And of course, that little valve amplifier completely blew the big transistor amplifier out of the water, and I was sort of mystified, like, this shouldn't be happening, should it? What's going on? And it's that I didn't take it as read that valve amplifiers were better than solid state amplifiers at that point, which is what many audio people do when they have a listening experience, and they try something out and they hear something, and that's the final truth when they hear that. And for me, it was more like an interesting mystery, and it's that attitude that I've carried with me for all those years.
So I have two questions in what you said. Number one, are you willing to share what is your most embarrassing album that you have in the collection that embarrasses you?
It's very obscure. I used to be into electronic music, like Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre and so on. So and I'm not embarrassed about that at all. But I was a bit short on cash when trying to buy music, and there was a cottage industry in Holland where sort of B-rated artists would simply try their level best to reproduce a particular music and put that out on a cut price CD. And so I have a few of those, and those would rate as my absolutely most embarrassing purchases.
Understood. Was your father into the electronics part as well, or was he strictly just into the listening of music?
Oh no, he's an engineer by training as well, just like myself. And okay. And in actual fact, I went to the same school as he did. But he wasn't in. He sort of got promoted out of the laboratory at some point at his job, and he ended up selling things like computer keyboards and relays, and as a result, he somewhat lost touch with hardcore engineering, and he always regretted that. So he told me, like, Bruno, if there's one thing you should never do is accept a promotion that would make you leave the lab and enter sales. So I've always remembered that. So he tinkered with amplifiers and with loudspeakers, but usually with a very pragmatic attitude. Not really going into the deep research end, but just trying to do something that was well constructed, and then tinkering with it until it also passed muster sonically, with a sort of a bit of measuring going on, but not really the hardcore, because for reasons which I explained.
Sure. Going back to your example of the transistor and valve, and you thinking that the valve sounded better, did he also have that curiosity as to the why?
I think to an extent, he was mostly interested in, having heard this, what do we do to make it better? Okay. That was more his way of looking at it. So we had a subscription to the Audio Amateur and to Glass Audio, and we built circuits that were published in there, and some of them indeed were really successful in terms of how they sounded, some less so, and so I think. So I think the way he and I did things in those days are quite similar to how a lot of people currently do audio design. So just fool around with it and listen to it, and try and find the patterns, not so much the explanations, but the patterns.
Right. So let's fast forward. You go to college for engineering, correct?
Yeah, so that was a complicated affair to begin with. Initially, I went to the local university, and I gave up halfway through the first year because sort of this very academic way of doing things just didn't sit well with me. It was never explained why things were taught the way that they were taught. I mean, if they'd gone out of their way to actually explain that, I think I might have stayed the course. But it just was studying because that's the stuff that we teach you, and take it or leave it. And as I realized that as a tinkerer, I actually knew more practical electronics than the final year students, I left it. And then I swung around to another school where I wanted to study sound engineering. I mean, just actual microphone and mixing desk type of sound engineering. But there I found that the things that they taught were also sort of, those were actually below my standards. So in the end, I just picked a school where I could get a basic course, a bachelor's degree in electronics. It's not really. I wouldn't normally recommend anyone do that if they want to go into hardcore engineering, because most of my classmates went into sales or repair or that sort of thing.
What was your first job after school?
Well, my thesis project was actually done with Philips. I was extraordinarily lucky, actually, that I lived so close to a local Philips research lab, not Eindhoven, curiously enough, but a place called Leuven. And they had an active interest at that point in Class D amplifiers, and so did I. I'd read about it some when I was 15 or something. I was always fascinated by it, and I said, well, you know what, maybe I'll just pick that up as a thesis project or so on. And believe it or not, they actually had something like that at Philips that they wanted to try out, and I was basically the first thesis student that they had who ended up producing working hardware. So because of my sort of more practical aptitude at that point, that actually landed me a job at Philips after I studied, and I stayed there for about 10 years, mostly doing Class D amplifiers. Although at the start, once I finally got a job, they didn't want to continue that project because Class D, that was tried and that wasn't good, and it was either in the past or in the future, but not in the present, and so on. So, but I fought very hard to be allowed to continue this work, and in the end they gave in. I think they decided that if they didn't, then they would get half-baked work from me on other subjects, and they'd probably better let me get on with it and see if anything useful came from that, because that was probably going to be more fruitful, which it was, I think.
What did they use the Class D amplifiers for?
Nothing. That was my great frustration at Philips, and actually it's not. It's something that I hear, or a complaint that I hear very often, that people in those days at Philips, they would do interesting or exciting projects and very often produce tremendously good results. But basically, product managers at Philips were, for some reason, second-rate engineers who just got promoted away, and they didn't know what to do with that. So they did. So they knew how to define a product similar to what other companies were already doing, but they had no idea how to handle technology that someone else didn't have. So as a result, if you come to this neck of the woods and you speak to Dutch and Belgian audio engineers, I mean, anyone who's anything has done their 10 years at Philips, learning the ropes. and then finally getting frustrated and walking out. So yeah, I've been allowed to try out the most wondrous things whilst working for Philips. But the first product that came out with an amplifier that I designed in it actually came out only only a couple of months after I'd left. They were very graceful about it because they sent me a unit in order to thank me for the work.
Interesting. And do you know what they used that amplifier for?
Yeah, it was Philips actually left kind of the hi-fi scene in the 90s. So it was always a sort of mid-range lifestyle type of product. Nothing earth-shattering. I mean, the silly thing is whilst working for Philips, our little group actually managed to license our technology, which later became known as UCD, to Yamaha before Philips used it.
Interesting. So you left Philips, and where did you go from there?
I left because, let's say what pushed me out, of course, as I said, was that at some point it was no longer motivating, and what pulled me out was Hypex, because Hypex existed as a small garage company, and they made what they call plate amplifiers for active speakers, and they just landed a fairly big deal for a German monitor company, and the owner had picked up that there was something going on at Philips Class D wise, so he dropped in. I gave him a demo, and immediately he bought a license, and then shortly afterwards he offered me a job, which is how I moved out of Philips and into Hypex, and that was my next 10 years.
I was going to ask, what year was that you started at Hypex?
That was about 2004, I think.
2004
or 2005. I think it was 2004.
And the owner of Hypex is Jan Peter, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
How were those years at Hypex?
A lot more exciting than at Philips in a way that sort of say an immediate commercial success. It was so people were actually buying those modules, putting them into products. Although we also sold fairly large amounts to DIYers, and so suddenly things started moving. So I spent the first 3-4 years designing a string of UCD based modules at different power levels, and afterwards there was a bit of time, and there was some impetus to give the technology another swing and try and improve it, and that's when sort of round about in 2008, 2009, I came up with Encore.
Right.
So yeah, so in a way, so Hypex was initially consolidation of the work that I'd done at Philips, and then halfway through a rush of new development work, including some completely offbeat stuff, like you might know that Hypex has kind of a house brand of high-end audio electronics called Mola Mola, and that was something that Jan Peter instigated, because he felt my irritation at the fact that all our high-end customers would always do something wacky with the amplifier modules that we sold them, and he said, if you want to show them how it's done, you know what, we'll just start something new, and so I think after 2008 especially after 2011, a fair amount of my time went into developing products for that brand.
And it's safe to say that all of those Mola Mola products were developed in that time frame, right? 2008 to 2010 ish.
No, it took a bit longer. So Mola Mola, the idea started somewhere around 2008, but we only started in earnest, say 2011, I think, and then we announced it slightly prematurely in 2012. And actual development went on more or less until I left Hypex, which was shortly after after kind of sort of all the important circuit modules and initial products and so on were done, and because it was quite funny initially. Of course, we thought, oh, that's going to be simple. We'll just pop an Encore module into a nice box and do a preamp with that. But actually, the preamp turned into this massive showpiece. That was just so much more. That was just so much more work than the power amplifiers. And then, of course, the next thing, need a DAC as well, and then the DAC became this other ultimate showpiece. And commercially, the DAC was kind of ready in 2013, and we started showing it around about then. Commercially, that went nowhere, because it sat in the same box as the preamplifier. So people were reviewing the preamplifier, mentioning that there was a DAC in there and mentioning that it was fine. But it was just like the market didn't accept a high-end D2A converter that didn't have its own box.
Right.
So very reluctantly, I mean, Jan Peter probably still remembers how reluctantly I accepted that we should just put it in its own box, and that was actually finished by my colleagues after I left, because of course, I mean, the actual guts were done.
Right.
And that now, sort of in the last 2 years, has started getting quite a bit more traction in the press and in the high-end market. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, well, that was done and dusted a long time ago. But well, the reason why I made it such a showpiece was because I wanted something that would last for years and would be up to date for years, and I think that seems to have worked.
And that's exactly where I was going, Bruno, was that work today is becoming very well known, even though it was designed years ago. And I think it's fair to say that the design was so far ahead of its time, just as the amplifiers, right? I think it's fair to say that in a way you brought Class D amplification mainstream to people like myself. And still to this day, there's obviously a big debate over what's better, Class D, Class A, Class AB, Class whatever you want to call, right? But you brought Class D mainstream. And that is a massive accomplishment for sure for all of us that own large heat producing Class A amplifiers, right? Mm-hmm. And still to this day, that technology is very prominent. Why did you leave Hypex ultimately?
That was really because I knew this guy in Denmark, who in the audiophile sphere is probably best known for, in the late 90s, designing a product called the Tact Millennium, which was a non-feedback digitally controlled Class D amplifier, and was the first of its kind. and then he moved to TI because they bought up his consultancy and the associated patents and so on, and he headed the Class D, the high power Class D group in TI, and so we used to meet at AES conferences. So we had each other on the radar for a long time, and I still recall the first time we actually met. We just started a conversation like it was all like we were already halfway into the discussion. So intuitively understood exactly what the other was trying to get across, and so we really felt this fantastic match. And so for years afterwards, whenever we met, we'd say, you know what, we should do something together. And finally, I ran into him, I think, in 2014 at an AES conference in New York. And I said, Lars, there's only two options here. Either we do something together or we don't.
Right.
And then we just we tried to put together a collaboration, and unfortunately we didn't manage to click the Hypex piece of the puzzle into place. So that's where I had to make a choice. Same as Lars, by the way, he had to leave TI, so I left Hypex, and that was the cleanest way of putting together a new venture, rather than trying to do so him with this big behemoth behind him and me with plucky little Hypex behind me. That just, we couldn't make that work. So
Gotcha.
so we just started from zero, us two together, and then supported by Peter Lingdorf, who also supported Lars when he did the TAC Millennium. So the two of them go back a long time.
What is your most proud product at Hypex, or the work you've done there that you're most proud of?
It's tough. I mean, initially I'd say MCore, but then of course there's this preamplifier and this and this D2A converter, and really I think I had a blast of a time, and I'm proud of it all.
Great. And I have to ask about the NC400, which was a extremely popular DIY kit that somebody at Hypex came up with. Was that your idea, or was that Jan Peter's idea, or a collaboration?
Let's say the NC400 grew out of a desire to keep the DIY and industrial markets separate. Our biggest fear was that if we started selling the exact same modules to both markets, that especially slightly smaller high-end audio companies would be annoyed by that, because they of course would have to answer questions like, okay, so what's the difference between your product and something that a DIY can put together? And in order to avoid that, we simply decided to keep the two lines apart, and since there was this NC1200 that of course every DIY wanted to have and couldn't, I said, okay, you know what, we'll do a slightly smaller module, but something that's got all the bells and whistles on it that you can possibly think of, and we'll just kit it out like a jewel. So make sure that it's just the most striking. It had to be beautiful in a way.
Right.
And then one of my other colleagues said, well, if you want to make it look special, what about making it round? So I laughed a bit and I said, okay, let's do that.
Interesting. So that's why it was round. Interesting.
Yeah, there was no technical reason for it, of course.
That's
the first
great.
pictures we released, the first pictures that we released shortly before the modules came out were actually edge-on shots, so people thought they were square.
That's funny. That's funny. Do you feel as though those 10 years at Hypex really propelled you as a designer?
Yes, I would absolutely say so. But the same is actually true for the years at Philips. I guess my years at Philips were really all about exploring the boundaries of class of class D, the perimeters of the technology, like what different combinations of styles of modulators, styles of power stages, and so on, to get a sense for what's the cleverest way of doing things. And then my years at Hypex, especially starting with Encore, was when I really started to make good on my on what I promised myself during my studies, that I would simply pick up theory as I went along, because I said I only did a basic course in electronics, and I consciously said, okay, I know that I'm going to miss out on a lot of theory. And I will have to be prepared to work that out for myself afterwards, because I haven't studied it. It's not something I would recommend, because I've seen too many people making the same promise and actually remaining stuck in the tinkering phase. But during the work at Hypex is really where I started burning up on the theoretical side, so yeah, you could say that made me more mature as a designer.
Did you work crazy hours at Hypex? Were you one that was working 80, 90 hours a week trying to figure it all out?
That varied enormously. That just depended on what was going on. You can't really work on something like hardcore mathematics when you're doing 80 hours a week. Then you need to restrict yourself to the hours that you can actually concentrate. So it was more like once things moved into the lab, that's when the days started stretching. But then on the other hand, in 2010, I married, so I could no longer afford to hide myself in the lab every single day. I mean, I could do it often enough because my wife is extraordinarily patient. But let's say I didn't think it would have been fair if I'd done that day in, day out.
Understood. After Hypex, you move on. You're now part of Purify, right?
That's correct.
You start Purify. What was the goal behind Purify?
The goal initially was to on the one hand tie some ends together on the Class D end. I had some thoughts on doing a digitally controlled Class D amplifier. That is to say, using ordinary feedback, but actually taking the feedback through an A to D converter into a logic circuit, so that other than controlling distortion of the amplifier, you could also do cleverer stuff. And what we had in mind was to do an amplifier, kind of a smart amplifier that could sense the distortion from the attached loudspeaker driver and reduce it. And it was in that vein that we started, and we ended up spending practically all of the first 2 years just trying to understand where the distortion in loudspeaker drivers, especially, I mean, just the motor, as we call it, the magnet and the voice coil, that system, where the distortion comes from, and how you can model that with an eye to compensating it. And that includes doing things like building our own test equipment. So we've got test equipment that can characterize a speaker more completely than sort of the kit that every driver manufacturer has, and can do it in like half a minute or something, whereas the industrial standard kit actually takes hours. So the degree of insight that we got in drivers was such that at some point Lars had this light bulb moment and said like hang on, if we do this and this and this and this, the motor should have no more distortion left, or at least the distortion should be so low that it's lower than what we would have hoped to achieve using active correction. So that was a cheerful insight, except of course then that put me out of a job as the resident amplifier guy. So essentially we split the two activities, research-wise, that is to say, and decided simply to market amplifiers and drive units separately, just out of the same company.
Did you have a hand in the drive units, the speakers themselves?
Partly. I would say the trouble that we have is I'm located in Belgium, and the rest of the gang is in Denmark. So I work remotely most of the time, and in spite of all the Teams and Zoom and telephones and what have you, it's difficult. It's harder to collaborate. So we ended up dividing the work more or less. That is to say, Lars is mostly concerned with driver research. I'm mostly concerned with amplifier research. But we spend hours and hours every week just talking together and sharing our problems and chipping in with ideas and sort of keeping the creative juices flowing. So I'm sure I brought in some interesting inspiration on the driver end, same as Lars has helped me work through some of the knottier problems on the numerical optimization side of the amplifiers, which was a bit of a big thing there. By now, we can't really remember who invented what. So we just quickly said, like, look, whenever we file for a patent, it'll just be the two of us there, maybe with other colleagues on there, but without really claiming who did what or trying to identify it, because it's no longer how we work. This for me was such a novelty because until I started Purify, I was always the smartest guy in the room, which is kind of a luxury. But on the other hand, the thing that happens when you have a second pair of brains around with of the same caliber that you can really collaborate with, and someone that you really understand on all levels, that allows you to do things that you couldn't have done before. So no matter who did what, the sheer fact that the other person was there as well, just led into new areas that neither of us would have gone alone.
What are the current plans, if you're able to talk about it, in terms of amplification, the Purify amplifiers?
Basically, for now, it's spinning out the Eigentakt technology into a larger range of modules. So we want to have some modules with a bit more power, with a bit less power, or aimed at certain applications and so on. Obviously, there's the boring little thing of also adding a power supply to our lineup currently, we simply tell people, like, look, you can buy a power supply from Hypex, but that's a bit of a curious arrangement, because it creates a dependency that's not really practical. So on the amplifier end, actually, I think the next few years in terms of pure hardcore research are going to be quite unglamorous.
Okay.
So really just broadening the product lineup rather than inventing anything new. And I guess that then probably a few years after that, then there might be another technology rush. I don't know. I always say, well, can it really sensibly get any better than this? And so far, I've always been wrong. So, well.
Do you believe that part of the possibility of success also depends on chip manufacturers or just parts in general?
To a degree, but not as much as people think. So that is to say, I could, if you sent me down to, let's say, 1990 with a time machine, I could probably, with what I know now, build an amplifier that is very close in performance to a current Eigentakt amplifier.
Really?
MOSFETs have improved, so you can now more easily do higher power amplifiers. I mean, if I had gone back to the 90s, I would probably be stuck in at about the 100 watt mark. Before I had to do things like put current steering diodes in the power stage and so on. That's no longer necessary. So MOSFET technology has certainly made things more practical, and things like technologies like gallium nitride, when they sort of become more affordable, they simply continue along that road. But there's nothing fundamentally going on. So the ET400 module, that is sort of currently our main product offering, uses MOSFETs that were first introduced in 2002. But these MOSFETs are phenomenally robust, and performance we get out of them is fantastic. So for now, I don't really see a reason why, say, at that power level, I should immediately switch to a different technology. On the other hand, for instance, I'm very much hoping to try out some of these new silicon carbide devices, because I mean, gallium nitride is all fine and well, and they're very fast and so on, but they don't really stretch the envelope of what's possible in terms of power level. And given that sort of our current 400 watt offering is already skirting what is physically possible to measure in terms of distortion, well, then there's not really a reason to do anything anything fancy there. But silicon carbide, that opens up the road to going up to powers like 10 kilowatts and so on, whilst still using the same type of control that I'm using in the Eigentakt modules. I mean, try to imagine a 10 kilowatt amplifier that has completely audiophile performance specs. That should be fun. So yeah, and then for the rest, things like op amps. So every now and then, that you get a new spate of op amps that are again better than the previous ones. So whereas 20 years ago I would have done a discrete design, I would now only consider a discrete design for some very, very unusual applications, or really to do something that isn't available as chips. So chips make life easier, but they don't fundamentally change the equation for me.
So for you, it really is all about the research. That's
It
really
is,
what
yeah.
separates your product from even a product in the earlier days where you still say with your research today, you could go back and build something similar.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Will the modules that are higher power and less power be available to consumers like myself, or will they be OE only?
We aren't planning to repeat the same strategy that we had at Hypex. So meaning that DIYers can always buy eval kits the same way that you currently can. Eval kits are of course quite expensive, but nevertheless they are available. And so that's the way that the DIY can get hold of new stuff. There is that we might do a differentiation on the driver end, not so much in terms of performance, but that we might do drivers that look a bit less like a handcrafted jewel when seen from behind, if they are to be sold to OEM customers who will only sell them sitting in a box.
Right.
But again, performance-wise, there are no plans of leaving the DIY market. What's the expression? Sort of sitting high and dry.
Yep. When do you believe the higher power modules will be available?
Oh, I think in the coming months you'll see some new announcements coming up I mean that this is at the moment really contingent on, as you know, there's this whole parts shortage thing going on, and this is really bogging us down as well. So we're only going to announce things when we can actually, when we know that we can ship things. Otherwise, we just put people off.
Right.
But yeah, I would say in the near future, you should expect somewhat higher powered Eigentakt modules turn up.
Okay. Does Purify manufacture their own modules and drivers in-house?
Drivers, yes. Modules, that's farmed out to a company that through, let's say, through Steinway Lingdorf we've known for years, and so we use the same manufacturing house as they do, but the drivers are actually made in the same building as where everyone is doing all the R&D.
How big of a team is Purify other than the leaders?
I was almost going to say I lost count, but that wouldn't be a clever thing to say, because that would imply I can't count to 10. But it's, yeah, no, you are looking at currently something around something between 6 and 10 people, depending on who you count.
So fairly low considering the volume that I would imagine you guys are producing, correct?
That's correct, and especially again on the driver end, this is a bit of an issue. So we are looking at speeding up manufacture, and we are extraordinarily lucky that on our team we have a chappie called Carsten Tingnord, who used to run both research labs and factories for Peerless before that moved to China under the Symphony flag. And so he has years under his belt designing drivers for manufacture and actually running factories. So bit by bit, I think we are moving towards a more automated assembly line At the moment, there's a fair bit of manual labor involved still, but over the years it'll be automated. So with a bit of luck, we should be able just to grow that capability as our volume grows.
With Purify having amplifiers and drivers, the next logical question for me would be, are you guys going to produce a speaker, an assembled commercial speaker?
Probably not, because we are selling drivers to other speaker manufacturers, and it's not exactly the done thing to start competing with your own customers. So at the moment, the thinking is no. And in actual fact, the speakers the only speakers that you can sort, well, the DIY thing that people make with our drivers is our demo speaker, and that thing is deliberately crude in its design and execution, because we didn't want to. Because we didn't want to create a situation whereby our customers didn't feel they could add something to the equation. So for now, there's no plan on doing finished products with under the Purify badge.
Understood. Are you still involved in Hypex at all, at any level?
No, I'm not. So we're now completely independent of each other. I do still support Mola Mola occasionally. So if they have any issues or things that they want to brainstorm about, I support them. But otherwise. But otherwise not, because I mean, as you can easily see that Purify will slowly become a direct competitor to Hypex, and seeing that coming, it's basically seeing that coming, that made Jan Peter and I decide decide also that I should leave the Mola Mola business, because there was a conflict of interest clearly forming. So I'm now an independent contractor for them, but not on a regular basis. And this arrangement works fine. So I'm quite pleased with how that turned out, because I mean, you can easily imagine that it could equally have caused an awful lot of bad blood between us, and I think especially Jan Peter has handled the whole thing so gracefully that there is no such bad blood between us.
Great. Well, I'm happy to hear that for sure, because what you two have accomplished is truly remarkable, in my opinion. And the Key Audio loudspeaker, is Key going to transition as a customer to Purify at all?
That's a question about the future, about which it is always difficult to make predictions, as they say in Denmark. But clearly there is at least in the engineering departments a clear desire to do something together. But there is no active intention to do that with the products that already exist.
Okay.
Because I mean, if we were to do such a thing, then we'd be bombarded by requests for upgrades and all of that. So we'd like to avoid that. So we meticulously keep the existing product lineup completely stable to the greatest possible extent. And again, since the Key 3 was designed with the aim of just having something that we could could just sell for years and years and years because it was just that good. That this works. So I think if you're looking for a Purify / key based product, we'd be looking at new products, not updates on the existing lineup.
What is your involvement in Key Audio?
I'm one of 5 co-founders, co-owners. I'm nominally the CTO, although I think probably lead researcher would be more precise, but because Bart van der Laan, who's supposedly the COO, is actually covering almost both posts at this time. I haven't mentioned him yet. Bart van der Laan is an absolutely brilliant guy, and extraordinarily level-headed, extraordinarily flexible. And I should have mentioned him before, because the way the Mola Mola DAC was designed, that was not just me alone behind a lab table. That was actually me behind a computer, developing DSP algorithms in MATLAB, and then sending those across the desk to him, and he would then do a DSP board and code it up, and so he actually did a lot of the design and debug work on the D2A converter, whereas I sort of was more sort of doing the top level architecture. So and unbelievably happy that he decided to join in when Key started, So my role is really to I basically get dusted off when there's a decision that there has to be a new speaker product, and then I'll do design, and then most of that design is, of course, well, as you can imagine, a lot of the electronics, especially the analog electronics. Strangely enough, all the CAD design, so all the plastics design, like for injection molding and stuff, I do that as well.
Oh wow!
Yeah, same thing for the Purify drivers. Actually, I'm actually the one that designs the baskets. So. Because they're injection molded in aluminium, well, that's when it's in metal we call it die cast, but nevertheless,
right.
So a fair bit of the mechanical design, the acoustical design, and half of the electronics, and then the digital half of the electronics is usually Bart, who picks that up.
You're quite busy, huh?
For the moment, a bit too much, yeah. It's at the moment we're going through a bit of a bit of a rough patch, again with the parts shortage. We'll weather it fine, and then there is, of course, the fact that the factory is moving. So we've got a new building in Germany. So in months from now, we're going to have to shift the whole lot from Holland to Germany and set up shop again. So it's busy days, but well, what would have been the alternative? I mean, the alternative must have been an ordinary desk job, where I would have to conform to the desires of bosses and things, and that just
doesn't work for Bruno.
No, it doesn't. So it's, I mean, when the days are getting longer like this, I do occasionally ask myself, like bloody hell, is this the only way that I can achieve happiness? And then you start lining up all the alternatives, and then you see, well, no. I mean, if I'd been doing a more predictable job, then I would have had a hobby, and that hobby would have quickly spun out into some sort of a commercial operation. So there you go.
Do you see yourself designing any standalone DSP units by any chance? Something very well designed, low noise, something that complements your amplifiers?
I think the easiest way of addressing that requirement would be just to design the analog front and back ends, and then just work through one of the usual suspects for the actual DSP work. Because one of the products that we did at Hypex was DSP plate amplifiers and DSP units and so on, and just the whole PC UI thing is so difficult. And let's say that the first iteration of our controller program, which I sort of knocked up on in a few weeks' time, which was then sort of kept up to date and added to and so on. That was such a disaster that I now realize that no, unless you have people on board who do nothing but build these programs and so on, then you shouldn't. At Key, it's a different thing. It's our own DSP platform. But then again, I've got the filter design software running in MATLAB, and it's all command line, and you get when it does a filter design, you just see tons of graphs popping up with very little idea of what they mean, and then at the end it says ping, and here you've got a binary that you can shoot into the DSP and it'll work. That's fine if it's your own product, but not if you want to support someone else's engineering department.
Right. So, unfortunately, no.
No, exactly. So I mean, I do think it might be possible at some point. We'll just do some reference designs for let's say the shortest path between a D2A converter chip and an Eigentakt module, something like that I see myself doing. Yeah.
Would you agree that the most popular DSP units, they're very good and their user interface is great? However, their performance, I guess for subwoofers they're fine, but for speaker they're subpar.
I think, yeah, that's let's say we get that feedback from people who are saying, will you do a DSP? Because, and then it's always, they're also just always talking about noise and distortion, but never about the usability of the product. So the usability of the product is clearly excellent. So we shouldn't redo all that work simply in order to get user-friendly DSP to people.
Agreed. Maybe a collaboration, that would be even almost ideal for both.
I'm completely open for that.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Bruno, is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to share, or that you wish I did ask? Or
I don't know, because let's say I've got some drums that I usually bang, and that's trying to be rational when you design audio. Because I mean, there are so many strands of irrationality in audio design that it's baffling, especially when those strands sort of point in opposite directions. So for instance, there are of course people who simply rely on listening and tweaking and listening and tweaking and so on, and that's clearly a path that I don't recommend, because you never learn what's actually going on fundamentally when if you do that, plus you have little chance of actually achieving something that is HiFi in the sense of high fidelity. But then on the other hand, I often get tremendous amounts of flack from what you might expect to be the scientific end of the commentariat, because I leave open the opportunity for using one's ears in order to learn something, and I consider that to be also a form of irrationality, because, for instance, when someone says, like, look, you can claim X, Y, Z is audible. You need double-blind test data to show that. And I'll just say, well, look, if I have a suspicion that something is audible, it might be a reasonable suspicion. It might, in your opinion, not be a reasonable suspicion, but fixing it is quicker and cheaper than organizing a proper double-blind trial. At that point, I'm just perfectly happy to do it unscientifically, because that is the rational thing. It would be irrational to throw such an amount of research into whether a particular type of distortion is audible, if you actually have a handle that you can turn to remove it easily without increasing the cost of the product. I mean, if someone says, like, look, this capacitor sounds so much better than that capacitor, and you have to use it, but this capacitor is unfortunately also 100 times more expensive, then I think that the rational thing would absolutely be to organize a proper listening trial to show that you're ever going to get your money's worth. Otherwise, you're just cheating your customers. Even the choice between how rational or how scientific do I want to be, even that is a knob that you can turn, and there's an optimum, and operating at that optimum is much more rational than operating at either of the extremes.
Does it bother you that people don't believe in the science? A lot of people don't believe in the science in hi-fi audio.
I've actually learned to sort of to shield myself from too many people's opinions. So I'm extraordinarily rarely seen on forums and Facebook these days, especially since things have become much more polarized in the past 10 years. I mean, I remember early days at DIY audio, and it was respectful and interesting discussions were had, and people could have different points of view without going for each other's jugular, and that's no longer the case. On the other hand, what I'm seeing on sort of on the upside, and that's especially sort of on the commercial end, when you go to trade shows, yes, you meet people who want to talk to you about things and want to convince you that you're wrong about something, but the people who are actually out to buy products, they actually just go looking for something that does the trick for them, without necessarily being having all this baggage. So I think the vocal minority who that have strong views against science, and that you hear and see everywhere, they are in a way not awfully relevant. to the industry at large. They have, some of them run small companies and they sell some products, and some of them buy some products, and it's a kind of a subculture. It exists. It's out there.
Sure.
Why should I be annoyed at the fact that some people exist? I mean, that would be extraordinarily irrational.
Understood. Bruno, I really want to thank you for your time, and certainly what you've produced in the past and are going to produce. I'm sure it'll be nothing short of incredible. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
and certainly your work.
Thank you for having me.
And if anybody wants to check out Bruno, purify-audio.com and keyaudio.com. Thank you so much, Bruno.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and Facebook at The Intellectual People Podcast and online at theintellectualpeoplepodcast.com. Check back for exciting new episodes.